Bauhaus were an English rock band from Northampton, fronted by singer Peter Murphy. They were founded in 1978, and having an initial existence from then till 1983, they were considered one of the founders of Gothic rock. They initially struggled to find a label who would let them have creative freedom, but when they did, they managed 4 albums in this stint. They've had several sporadic reunions since then, one of which spawned another album in 2008. Hi, my name's Dan, and this is a review of the album In the Flat Field by Bauhaus. It was their first album, it was released in 1980, and it's my first time listening to it. So, from my limited understanding, and I'm always feeling like in many areas of music, I have somewhat of a limited understanding. Obviously, as I go through this process of reviewing these 3,000 albums, my knowledge is growing, but it's still through my own perspective, obviously. But why am I saying this? From my limited understanding, I'm going to claim that this is where post-punk is starting to morph into goth rock, which is an offshoot of post-punk, as far as I understand it. So musically, this is. Some people have said it's goth rock. Some people have said it's post-punk. Other things have been said. Musically, it's quite strident, and it's got a stark darkness to it. There's a high and scratchy electric guitar, and I think scratchy is a really good word for the way the guitar sounds, that sits above a rolling rhythms from a toppy bass. So it's got it's got quite a bit of high frequencies in the bass, which gives it a snap to it. And drums. And the drums are often used in quite unusual patterns here. There's a move to toms away from cymbals in general, and not a lot of, well, I couldn't say categorically, but away from lots of the kind of the bass drum snare hi-hat stuff that a lot of people do or did. Now, this using toms more thing is a more modern thing, so they were maybe a bit ahead of their time. So they're foreshadowing later stuff here. The feel of it, I would say, owes more to krautrock than to punk, and it's got a general aesthetic that reminds me of brutalist architecture. It's kind of it's this starkness. You can see kind of empty buildings or factories made of concrete and stuff. It's that kind of how I go from a musical sound to a visual architecture. I don't know, but it's something that I do in my head. Um, the singing is, well, he's got kind of 2 modes. He's got low, dark, and menacing, or high, panicked, and menacing. He's got a naturally dark and menacing voice. He's not got a voice that would lend itself well to comic songs. It's a voice that just lends itself well to this kind of, we're in a little bit, we're not quite horror, but we're in a bit of darkness, and things are quite, potentially disturbing here. And it's the whole thing is all about tension and menace, and it achieves that pretty well, I would say. So I found it quite effective. In retrospect, maybe it sounds a little self-parodying, but I don't think it was meant to be. I think it's just because in retrospect this became a thing, and so parodies become, when things become a stereotype. And I do understand why this is considered to be an influential album, because the timing of this is kind of early in this emergence of Gothic stuff. It would happily sit alongside Susie and the Banshees' album Juju that I reviewed not that long ago on a shelf. It's got a reasonable number of similarities to it. In fact, my kind of preception of Bauhaus was that they were somewhere on the edgy side of things in music at this point. I don't know if I've ever actually heard any before, but I have a memory of, I've mentioned this guy before. There was a guy in my class at school, so we were about kind of mid-teens at this sort of stage, 1980, and he had a yellow bag that he had the logos of bands on. Well, earlier in his school career they were heavy metal bands and Rush and people like that, and then he abandoned that, and then there were punk bands, and then he abandoned that bag, and then the next bag, they all seem to be the same bag, but the logo seemed to change, had Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus and some others on it. So I've always associated it with that kind of edgy, slightly out of the mainstream stuff, and I think that's right. It it definitely is in that kind of area. The lyrics are about taboo subjects mostly. I've got listed here: martyrdom, prostitution, obsession, stigmata, madness. Not silly love songs. We're in dark subject content here. There's a song about the spy in the cab, which is about a thing that was put in British trucks to make sure that drivers didn't drive too long without having a break. It's got a certain feel of paranoia to it, which again I'm sure is a studied thing that is meant to give you this feeling of things aren't quite right in the world. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I did actually. I was not sure what I was expecting. As I said, I knew that they were considered edgy. I guess they probably still are. The sounds of it is of its time, I would say, but it carries it off with convincing conviction, and the content is quite rich. It's an interesting list, so it kept me interesting, and yeah, I kind of enjoyed the feel of it. I have to say as well. I'm not a person who's really kind of, I don't have a big thing for the dark side of life, as it were. But this did, speak to me, certainly a little bit. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. As always, at this point, though, I'd love to know what you think of this album, because this is just my opinion. I'm just a guy who happens to have a camera and happens to go through this crazy process of trying to review stuff. Your opinion is as legitimate as mine, and I'd love to hear what it is. So please do share with me through the comments. But that's it from me for now.
Back in the good old days when dancing meant exploding, the idea was simple for a decent overloading, and for a monocle flash with no cards attached, the camera with a more remote flash trigger. It's connecting to an accessory to his hip, which automatically fires in perfect synchro.